Wolf howls at the moon every night. What happens next is unbelievable. The bitter chill of winter gripped the small, remote town of White Hollow, nestled deep in the Northern Rockies. Snow blanketed the forested mountains, muffling every sound except the whisper of the wind through the towering pines. It was a world of white silence, broken only by a haunting howl that pierced the frosty air each night. Before we move on, let me know where you're watching from in the comments down below. Tess Donovan, a 32-year-old wildlife biologist, had arrived in White Hollow 2 months earlier to conduct a study on the region's dwindling wolf population. She lived in a modest cabin on the edge of the forest, her days filled with tracking, observation, and recording data. But her nights were dominated by the eerie, lonely cries of a single wolf. Tess first heard the howling on her second night in the cabin. She had assumed it was part of a pack's nightly communication, but as the weeks passed, she realized this wolf's cry was different. It was solitary, mournful, and always directed toward the moon. She couldn't shake the feeling that the wolf's howls carried a deeper meaning. Wolves howled to communicate with their packs, to claim territory, or to locate each other. But this lone wolf seemed to be calling for something or someone that never came. One snowy evening, Tess decided to investigate. The moon hung high, casting a cold silver glow over the forest. She wrapped herself in a thick parka, pulled on her snow boots, and slung her camera and field journal over her shoulder. Her loyal Alaskan Malamute, Luna, followed close behind, her thick fur blending seamlessly with the snow. "Stay close, girl," Tess whispered as they ventured into the forest. The wolf's howl rose again, echoing through the trees. Tess paused, her breath visible in the icy air. Luna's ears perked, her nose twitching as she picked up the scent of something nearby. Tess followed her dog's lead, the two weaving through the snow-covered woods. After an hour of trudging through the forest, they came upon a clearing. In the center, illuminated by the moonlight, stood a wolf. His silver-gray coat glistened like frost, and his piercing amber eyes reflected the moon's glow. He was larger than any wolf Tess had ever seen, his presence both majestic and haunting. Tess froze, her heart pounding. She had spent years studying wolves, but she had never been this close to one in the wild. Luna, surprisingly calm, stood at her side, her gaze locked on the wolf. The wolf turned his head toward the sky and howled, the sound so powerful it seemed to shake the trees. Tess felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. There was an intelligence in his eyes, a sadness in his voice that was almost human. She raised her camera, snapping a few photos, but the wolf didn't flinch. Instead, he lowered his head and stared directly at her. Tess held her breath, unsure of what to do. Wolves were typically wary of humans, yet this one seemed unafraid. Was he injured, or had he been alone for so long that he no longer feared people? Slowly, Tess knelt in the snow, trying to appear less threatening. Luna wagged her tail cautiously, her body language calm and non-confrontational. The wolf took a step forward, his massive paws crunching softly in the snow. "Hey there," Tess whispered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You're a big guy, aren't you? What's your story?" The wolf stopped a few feet away, his eyes locked on hers. Tess didn't dare move, afraid of startling him. Then, without warning, he turned and disappeared into the trees, his silver coat blending into the shadows. Tess exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath. "Come on, Luna," she said, her voice barely audible. "Let's head back." Over the next few days, Tess couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. She pored over her notes and photos, trying to identify the wolf. His size and coloring didn't match any of the wolves she had documented in the area. She even checked with local rangers, but no one had reported sightings of such a distinctive animal. As the days turned into weeks, the wolf's howls continued. Tess began leaving food near the clearing, hoping to coax him closer. Each morning, she found the food gone and fresh paw prints in the snow, but the wolf remained elusive. Then, one night, Tess awoke to Luna growling softly at the window. She got up, pulling aside the curtain, and gasped. The wolf was standing just beyond her porch, his amber eyes glowing in the moonlight. He stared at her for a long moment before turning and trotting into the forest. Tess felt a strange pull to follow him. She quickly dressed, grabbed a flashlight, and headed into the woods with Luna. The wolf's tracks were fresh, his path winding through the snow-laden trees. He seemed to be leading her somewhere. After an hour of walking, Tess reached another clearing. This one was different. The snow here was disturbed, as if a struggle had taken place. In the center of the clearing was a large, flat stone, its surface etched with strange markings. Tess approached cautiously, her flashlight illuminating the engravings. They were intricate, almost ancient-looking, and they seemed to depict wolves alongside human figures. At the edge of the clearing, the silver wolf sat silently, watching her. "What is this?" Tess murmured, her voice barely audible in the stillness. She knelt beside the stone, tracing the carvings with her gloved fingers. The images told a story, one of unity between wolves and humans, of a bond that transcended time. Tess felt a shiver run down her spine. This wasn't just a random find, it was a message. As she looked up at the wolf, she realized that their encounter was no coincidence. This wolf was trying to tell her something, and she was determined to uncover the truth. Unbeknownst to Tess, her discovery was just the beginning of an extraordinary journey, one that would challenge everything she thought she knew about wolves, the wilderness, and the mysterious bond between man and nature. The snow crunched under Tess's boots as she knelt by the stone, tracing the ancient carvings with her gloved fingers. The designs were mesmerizing. Detailed images of wolves and humans intertwined, their forms united in an inexplicable harmony. Tessa's heart raced with curiosity and awe. What was this place? And why had the wolf led her here? The silver wolf, sitting at the edge of the clearing, watched her intently. His amber eyes seemed to hold a knowing, as though he understood the significance of the moment far better than she did. Luna sat beside Tess, her ears twitching and her nose pressed to the ground, sniffing at the stone. "This has to be old," Tess murmured to herself, pulling out her notebook to sketch the carvings. She recorded every detail, the flowing lines that seemed to represent rivers, the intricate spirals on the wolves' bodies, and the human figures with outstretched arms. It felt less like art and more like a story carved in stone. As Tess worked, the wolf stood and began pacing the clearing. She watched him out of the corner of her eye, her pulse quickening when he stopped at a spot near the stone and began pawing at the snow. His large paws kicked up flurries of white, revealing what looked like another carved surface beneath the frost. Tess rose and approached cautiously, her flashlight illuminating the area. The wolf stepped aside, allowing her to inspect his discovery. She brushed away the snow, revealing another section of the carvings. This one showed a single wolf standing apart from the pack, its head raised in a howl, while a crescent moon shone above it. "What are you trying to show me?" Tess whispered, glancing at the wolf. He met her gaze, his amber eyes steady and calm. Tess photographed the new section of the stone before sitting back on her heels. Something about the images resonated with her, as if she were uncovering a piece of forgotten history. She had always believed wolves were deeply misunderstood, their role in the ecosystem undervalued. But this felt like evidence of something greater, a connection between wolves and humans that had been lost over time. The next morning, Tess returned to the clearing with Dr. Elias Monroe, a local archaeologist and historian she had met at a community event weeks earlier. Elias was in his early 40s, with sharp features and a keen intellect. He had been studying indigenous artifacts in the area for years, and Tess hoped he could shed light on the carvings. "This is incredible," Elias said, crouching beside the stone with a magnifying glass. "These carvings are unlike anything I've seen in the region. They resemble petroglyphs created by the ancient peoples who lived here. But the wolf imagery is unusually prominent." Tess nodded, her breath visible in the frosty air. "What do you think it means?" Elias traced the lines with his finger, his brow furrowed in thought. "It's hard to say without more context, but it seems to depict a symbiotic relationship between humans and wolves. See how the figures are positioned together, almost as equals? That's rare in ancient art, especially with predators like wolves." The silver wolf appeared at the edge of the clearing again, his presence as silent and commanding as ever. Tess motioned to him. "He's the one who led me here. It's like he wanted me to find this." Elias glanced at the wolf, his expression a mix of skepticism and intrigue. "That's unusual. Wolves typically avoid humans unless they're desperate or curious, but he doesn't seem afraid of you." Tess told Elias about the wolf's nightly howls, his peculiar behavior, and the strange bond she felt forming with him. Elias listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "Wolves are highly intelligent," he said finally, "but it's almost as if he's guarding something." "Or guiding me," Tess added, her voice soft. Elias nodded, his eyes scanning the clearing. "Either way, I think this site deserves a closer look. I'll bring some equipment tomorrow to take proper measurements and document the carvings." That night, Tess couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire in her cabin, staring at the photos she had taken of the carvings. Luna lay at her feet, her head resting on her paws as the flames cast flickering shadows across the walls. Tess's thoughts were a whirlwind of questions. Who had created the carvings? What story were they trying to tell? And why did the wolf seem so intent on her finding them? The wolf's howl shattered the silence, reverberating through the forest like a call to action. Tess stood abruptly, pulling on her coat and boots. Luna perked up, ready to follow. This time, the wolf was closer. Tess didn't need to venture far before she saw him, standing in the snow just beyond the tree line. His silver coat shimmered in the moonlight, and his eyes glowed like embers. "Where are you taking me tonight?" Tess asked, her voice barely audible. The wolf turned and began walking, his steps deliberate. Tess followed, her breath misting in the icy air. They moved deeper into the forest, the snow crunching beneath her boots. Luna trotted alongside her, her tail wagging softly. After a while, they came to another clearing. This one was different. It was smaller, more secluded, and surrounded by tall pines that seemed to form a natural barrier. In the center stood a massive, gnarled tree, its twisted branches reaching skyward like skeletal arms. The wolf stopped at the base of the tree, his nose brushing against the bark. Tess approached cautiously, her flashlight illuminating the tree's surface. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw it. More carvings etched into the bark with precision and care. The images were faint, worn by time, but they were unmistakable. Wolves and humans again, but this time they were joined by other animals, elk, eagles, bears, all surrounding a crescent moon. At the bottom of the carving was a single word written in an ancient script Tess couldn't decipher. Elias would need to see this, Tess thought, her mind racing. She took photos and notes, her hands trembling with cold and excitement. The wolf watched her the entire time, his amber eyes unblinking. Tess couldn't shake the feeling that he was trying to communicate something. But what? As the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of snow, Tess knew she was on the brink of uncovering something extraordinary. She just didn't know how deep the mystery would go, or how much it would change her life. Little did she know, the answers she sought were closer than she realized, and the wolf's role in her discovery was far more significant than she could have imagined. The following morning, Tess returned to the clearing beneath the gnarled tree, this time accompanied by Ellis and his equipment. They trudged through the fresh snow in silence, the weight of anticipation heavy between them. Luna bounded ahead, her enthusiasm a stark contrast to the tension Tess felt. The silver wolf was waiting for them at the base of the ancient tree, his regal form almost ethereal in the morning light. Elias paused mid-step, his breath catching. "You weren't kidding," he murmured, staring at the wolf. "He's magnificent." The wolf locked eyes with Elias, then turned his gaze to Tess, as if urging them forward. Without hesitation, Tess led the way to the carvings, where Elias began unpacking his tools. As he examined the intricate designs etched into the tree bark, his expression shifted from curiosity to awe. "This predates the carvings on the stone," Elias said, running his fingers over the weathered markings. "Look at the depth of the cuts, the artistry. This could be centuries old." "What about the word at the base?" Tess asked, pointing to the faint script. "Do you recognize it?" Elias squinted, his brow furrowing. "It's similar to Old Norse runes, but not quite. It could be a hybrid script, something unique to this area." He pulled out a reference guide, flipping through the pages. After a few moments, his face lit up with realization. "It translates to pact." "Pact," Tess echoed, her voice tinged with confusion. "What kind of pact?" Elias stepped back, his gaze drifting from the tree to the wolf, who was now sitting quietly a few feet away. "I think this might be a record of an ancient agreement between humans and wolves. The carvings suggest cooperation, a mutual respect and bond." Tess felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She looked at the silver wolf, who met her gaze with a steady intensity. "Do you think he's connected to this somehow?" Elias hesitated, then nodded slowly. "It's possible, Animals can have instincts and behaviors passed down through generations. This wolf might be honoring a legacy we've forgotten. Over the next week, Tess and Elias worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. They scoured archives, consulted experts, and documented every detail of the carvings. Their research revealed a local legend about a group of settlers who lived in harmony with the wolves, relying on them for guidance, protection, and even companionship during harsh winters. In return, the settlers promised to respect the wolves' territory and care for their needs. The pact, however, had been broken generations ago when the settlers expanded their lands, disrupting the wolves' habitat. The carvings were thought to be a record of that agreement, a plea for the bond to be remembered. "It's no wonder he howls at the moon," Elias said one evening as they pored over their findings in Tess's cabin. "It's a call for help, for recognition. He's carrying the weight of his ancestors' promise." Tess leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting to Luna, who was curled up by the fire. The silver wolf had become a near constant presence outside the cabin, his watchful eyes following Tess wherever she went. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for her to do something. "I think he wants me to make things right," Tess said softly. "To honor the pact." Elias nodded. "But how? The bond between humans and wolves has been fractured for so long." Tess didn't have an answer, but she knew the first step was rebuilding trust. She spent hours with the wolf each day, bringing him food and sitting quietly in his presence. Slowly, he began to let her closer. She marveled at his intelligence, his grace, and the unspoken understanding that passed between them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the moon rose high above the forest, the wolf approached Tess. She sat on the snow-covered ground, her breath visible in the frigid air. He stopped just a foot away, his amber eyes locking onto hers. "What do you need from me?" Tess whispered. The wolf turned his head toward the horizon, his ears twitching. Then he let out a long, mournful howl that echoed through the trees. Luna joined in, her smaller voice blending with his. Tess felt a shiver run down her spine, a primal recognition of something ancient and powerful. In that moment, Tess understood. The wolf wasn't just asking for help, he was offering it. Together, they could bridge the gap between humans and nature, reminding the world of the harmony that had once existed. The following week, Tess and Elias organized a community meeting to share their findings. They presented the carvings, the history of the pact, and the wolf's role as a guardian of the forest. At first, the townsfolk were skeptical, dismissing it as folklore. But Tess's passion and the undeniable evidence eventually won them over. "We owe it to the wolves and to ourselves to honor this bond," Tess said, her voice strong and resolute. "It's not just about them. It's about restoring balance and respecting the land we share." The community agreed to establish a conservation area around the Cedar Ridge Forest, protecting the wolves' habitat and ensuring their safety. It was a small step, but an important one. As the first snowfall of the season blanketed the forest, Tess returned to the clearing beneath the ancient tree. The silver wolf was waiting, his form illuminated by the pale light of the moon. Tess knelt before him, her heart full of gratitude. "We've done it," she said softly. "The pact is renewed." The wolf stepped forward, pressing his nose against her hand in a gesture of acceptance. Tess felt a surge of emotion, a deep connection that transcended words. That night, the forest echoed with the howls of wolves, a chorus of unity and hope. Tess stood beneath the moon, Luna by her side, and listened. For the first time, she felt truly at peace, knowing she had played a part in something extraordinary, a bond not just between humans and wolves, but between all living things.